did you choose Will as your partner? Because obviously you did capture with your sister before, so she had some strategic chops. You said that you auditioned with many other people, so why Will in particular?
Yeah, I had always applied with my mom originally. She and I just have a really great relationship, and me being adopted, we always thought that that was a really compelling story angle. So my mom and I applied together the most out of anyone that I applied with it. So about four times, five if you count family edition. And my mom and I actually got a phone call for one season, did the phone interviews, got all the paperwork. We really thought we were going to go to finals, but and eventually the casting producer called us and they said, due to the physicality of the show, it's getting a lot more extreme. We're just worried about your mom and her health. And we had to do all these tests and paperwork and it just never panned out. So around that time when I was like, let me put a pin in auditioning for the show, that's when I met Will. And we just really connected over our mutual love for reality competition shows. And to hear that he grew up watching The Amazing Race just like I did, I said, well, let's try to throw our hat into the ring. I feel like we would make a really strong team. And after three times applying together, third time was the charm. And I think, with timing and me being a firm believer that things happen for a reason, I think Will was obviously always meant to be my partner on The Amazing Race.
Yeah. So going into it, obviously being like a super fan, like what did you expect going into it and like how did it change?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely expected it to be difficult. I mean, I've watched every season, I've seen every episode, I've never missed one. And I knew it was going to be hard, but you could never really anticipate, I would say, like the sleep deprivation that comes with it. And like, even with being a fan, like read your clue and all that stuff. And we quickly became that team. And a lot of that had to do with sleep deprivation and not really slowing down and taking a deep breath and rereading our clue and that second leg. But I think the hardest part definitely was just the high peaks of adrenaline and then the crashing afterwards. It was just so much up and down and stressful moments, high anxiety moments, and then all of a sudden it would be done, the leg would be complete, and then you would crash because your body is just so hyped up on adrenaline. So watching the show, being on the couch, yes, it's stress inducing as a viewer, but actually living it was unlike anything I could have prepared for. And Will and I prepared a lot.
Oh yeah, you did, and we'll get to that a little bit later. Uh, so going into it, like how awesome was that Trinidad party, like the first leg of the race? You obviously mentioned you had a lot of adrenaline, but like coming off the plane and just dealing with a long flight and then maybe just like chilling and having a party, like how awesome was that like for like a first thing to do in the race?
Yeah, I also don't think watching the premiere episode just how tired a lot of us were up until that point. When we were standing at the starting line at the Hollywood Bowl, it was like 11 o'clock at night. So we all kind of assumed we were going to be taking a red eye to whatever the first destination was going to be. So when we ripped open our clue and saw it was Trinidad and Tobago and our flight wasn't leaving until 6:30 in the morning, we're like, "Oh, great. Like we're really starting off our journey sleeping in the airport. Like this is what we signed up for." So nobody got sleep that first night. It was just so cold in the airport. Every 10 minutes that automated voice would come on the intercom being like, do not leave bags unattended. And like, it was just a long night. So when we finally got on the airplane, we flew to Houston. We had a layover there for 2 hours and then flew from Houston to Trinidad. And we were kind of held before we were released to go do that first task of rolling the steel drums or the oil cans. And it just, I think when we were in the midst of that festival and being a part of Carnival, like it to me was like, this is going to be what this experience is going to be like from this point forward. We're going to be so tired. But when you're in those moments of just being able to experience the culture and just interact with the people of the places you're visiting, like that was such a highlight. So for me, it kind of set the tone. Like, this is exactly what we signed up for. This is the Amazing Race. It's starting. And to like kind of end our first day of our journey with that was definitely a highlight.
So obviously you do well with that. Your team number, I think you were one. Then you go into finding the fish. You do a great job with that. Will absolutely destroys the roadblock. And then what was it like dealing with those goats?
I was definitely worried. I mean, the moment we walked up to the area where the goats were released from, the locals were like, "Here, like grab onto the rope," and I'm like wrapping it around my arm. And I remember joking, and I look, and I remember I'm pretty sure Elise, the creator, was there, and I looked at her, and she's just got this big smile on her face because I'm just like, I look terrified. I was like, "What are we about to do? Like, how fast are these goats going to run?" I mean, like, this is a thing here in Trinidad and Tobago. Like, these goats could run at super speeds. Who knows? So once the gates opened, I don't know. I just became like Speedy Gonzalez. Like, it was just like, boom. Like, I just ran, booked it. Will and I were in sync, going like, this is what we trained for. We've done so much running exercises, and here we are running with goats. And we ended up actually like kind of outrunning our goats, which was kind of fun. But I was definitely nervous because being a fan of the show and going into The Amazing Race, Will and I were always really apprehensive to do any tasks that involved animals because you're kind of at their control. Like, if they want to be stubborn and not move, that's on them, and you get held up because of it. So I was a little nervous in how the goats would respond, but I should have known better. They're goats. This is what they do. They do goat racing, and they were ready to run guns a-blazing.
Yeah, so going into the next leg, it's back to back, which seems miserable. But can you kind of talk about how the Mine Five started? Like, obviously, we saw that you guys were the top five at that point, but you still have to like suss out every team and figure them out. So, was there any like bonding that we missed, or were you just like right off the bat, like, this is our five, whoever's going to finish in the top fives, like, I don't care, or I want an alliance immediately?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Will and I went into the race with this plan of forming a mob mass alliance of five teams. The origin of the Mine Five really kind of started after Trinidad and Tobago. So when we are having a lot of downtime in Bogota, our cast from the jump was very, very close. Like, there was no drama, everyone got along. We really enjoyed each other's company, especially in the downtime from the airports and like being in the salt mine together. And during that downtime, you're catching up with the other teams, like hearing about what their experience was like on the first leg, and everyone's swapping stories. And I remember Leo telling us specifically, like, "Oh yeah, like, with all our teams on that second flight to Tobago, we all said like maybe we should help each other out because we're the bottom teams right now. Like, if we work together to like maybe gain some time on the first flight, like maybe that would help us." So he's telling us this idea, and perception being reality. Nate and Cody were part of the first flight with us, and Nate and Cody got eliminated. So I was like, oh my God, this is a genius idea. Like, Leo was just laying it out on the table that they all wanted to work together if they could to, kind of get ahead of the first flight. So I was like, that's actually kind of brilliant. So Will and I talked about it, and that morning when we left the salt mine, we said, let's do the same thing, but let's do a little bit of a role reversal. We're the first group to be released from the mine. Let's just help each other stay ahead. And that's all the agreement was. We never sat there at the mine saying, let's form an alliance with the first five teams leaving. Like, it wasn't this big calculated thing that I think a lot of viewers thought. It was really like, if you watch the edit closely, like I say, like, let's just do what we can to stay ahead. And I think the context of that was taken out of context by viewers, thinking like it was going to be this long-term plan, but it really was just for the Bogota leg. Like, let's just stay ahead of the teams, let's just work together. But if you watch the rest of that episode, we never helped each other. Like, no one gave us clues on how to do the truck. No one really told us like, do this and this. Sure, we got some navigation, pointers when we were in the city. And of course, D'Angelo throwing us a little bit of a clue as to what the roadblock was. But beyond that, there was little to no help on the tasks themselves. And we, got sick. So our plan of staying in the top five, it didn't really help because we got sixth place. So it wasn't like this master plan that was kind of like devised in the mine itself.
Yeah, so can you kind of talk about like fixing that car and not finding the horn. It was one of the few times where you like panicked. So like what was that like? And then kind of like just surviving that leg because you seemed like really nervous that you were gonna go home.
Oh my God, it was so nerve-wracking because, and I forget who told us, I don't know if it was a producer or a camera guy, but we were told we put the truck together the fastest. We designed it, we did everything right the fastest. And like we were like, oh my God, I can't believe like we lost so much time because of the freaking horn. But if we would have just done the horn from the jump and actually slowed down to read our clue, we probably would have been one of the first two teams to leave that task. So while we're there, all the teams start showing up. Like when other teams are with you, that's when the pressure really starts to set in. You're like, oh my God, it's anyone's race at this point. Like one little mistake can really screw you up. And being a big super fan, I was in my head about that. And it was so funny rewatching the episode. I have zero recollection in my brain being like, Will, let's reread the clue. I totally forgot I asked him that. And I just wish that I would have pressed a little harder and said, no, 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 let's stop. Give me the clue. We're going to reread this. Because I guarantee you we would have been one of those top three placements for that leg. But as people started to leave, the motion started to get high. And I was like, damn, like we're really doing something wrong. And then lo and behold, Mr. Will decides to reread the clue. And he's like, it's the horn. And I was like so elated and so thrilled because as long as we were ahead of the other teams, I felt really secure in our position. And I'm glad that we got out of there when we did and reread our clue, even though it took us a minute to do that.
Where did the tension with Leo and Alana start? Because like why did you return them? Because at the time, like were they targeting you? Because you weren't really like a quote unquote strong team at the time, like finishing fourth and sixth, like you're kind of middle of the pack. So can you kind of talk about that and like why they were such a target and maybe was there like some underlining tension?
Sure. I mean, I can speak to mine and Will's obviously experience with Leo and Alana. The very first leg when we were in the airport before we even left for Trinidad and Tobago, D'Angelo asked, I would say the group collectively, like, who's fans? Like, have some of you seen the show or is anyone here super fans? And Will and I always knew we wanted to tone down the super fan side of us to not seem like we knew the show really well. And Leo and Alana started talking about how, like, oh yeah, they watched the show together and like I was like, oh my God, these are my people because they love the show as much as I do. But being the competitor that I am and being so aware of how these competition shows work, I was like, that can be a threat. Like people who really know the show, that can be scary. And as we started to progress, I mean, two legs in, that really, over the course of those two legs, Bogota and Trinidad and Tobago, it had already been like 4 or 5 days that we were all together collectively. And when Leo started telling us about the first flight and or the flight stuff to Trinidad and Tobago about how we want to stay together and like maybe knock someone out from the first flight, I started to realize that they were really smart. They were in this to compete. They were in this to win just as much as Will and I were. And to Will and I personally, that was threatening because the race is designed for any team to win. You don't necessarily have to be the strongest. You just have to be the smartest. And that was quoted from season one, Team Guido themselves. And that's something I took to heart. And I was like, Leo and Alana are a team we need to watch out for. And I think because they talked a lot, like they are talkers, they're very outgoing. I think a lot of the other teams started to get worried too because they started to hear a lot about how much Leo and Alana knew about the amazing race. And even on our flight from Bogota to Manaus, we sat in front of Leo and Alana. They're spitting out facts about the show, things that only I would know as a crazy super fan. And I was like, damn, like we really got to keep an eye on these two. And then when we were in the airport from Bogota to Manaus, we had FaceTime with Frank and Jerry. And Frank and Jerry told myself, Madison and Riley, and Gary and D'Angelo that they helped Haley and Kaylin, and their whole reasoning is because they wanted to knock out Kelly and Levon because Kelly and Levon were perceived to be a stronger team. So again, hearsay and being told this information, it was further validating, I think, what Will and I felt about, wow, Leo and Alana are coming in this strong. They know how to run this race. They know how to work well with the other teams. that to us was scary because it's similar to the race that we wanted to run. And so that's kind of, I would say, the competitive tension started to build. So after that information of Jerry and Frank telling us, like, Leo and Alana helped Haley and Kaylin on the truck specifically to knock out Kelly and Levon, that kind of ran rampant among the other teams of like, okay, they're being strategic. So we knew by the time we got to the U-turn board that that was the safest team to U-turn based on conversations we had collectively with other teams, that nobody was going to be upset if we U-turned them. If we U-turned another team like Hung and Chi or Gary and D'Angelo, we would have been in hot water. Those are teams that would have retaliated and had the potential to retaliate. So it was more competitive tension for Will and I. I don't know how the tension built for other teams, if there was any, but Will and I just knew that they were our biggest competition because of how well prepared and how educated they were when it came to the Amazing Race. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer.
This is your podcast. You're allowed to say whatever you want. I've had a podcast last 3 hours, so you can say it's up to you, however, what you want to say and how long you want to say it.
And since we're on the topic of episodes 2 and 3, you know, obviously at the start of episode 3, you see Will and I approach Madison and Riley in the airport, and they're really the first team that we approached of every team to say, let's work together, let's help each other out in this race. And we never had that conversation with Ishwar and Aparna. We never had that conversation with Gary and D'Angelo. Even though you hear the audio sound bites, the only team that we actually concretely like said, let's work together as a unit was Madison and Riley at that point. But of course, being the Mind Five, it started to develop even more so because D'Angelo would say, like, oh, are we going to work together again? And like, you're not going to tell teams like, no, we don't want to work together, because that just causes drama. So to be very politically in a good spot, we wanted to be like, yeah, like, of course, because there's yields at play, there's U-turns. And I think the yield and U-turn components made our season a lot more of a social game as well than what seasons were before us.
Yeah, were you excited about the yield, like being a super fan? Because at that point, like watching it, like back then, that was a throwback that I really didn't expect that was going to come back.
I know. I mean, yeah, being the throwback of the yield and being a part of that was so exciting. And I really loved their fresh take on the yield and how it was used. Unfortunately, I think a lot of teams were like, oh, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, like that's really not going to do much, because every leg was pretty much an equalizer. So I think it really didn't play out maybe the way the producers had intended. But as a fan, I was so excited the yield was back. I wish people utilized it more besides just myself and Haley and Kaylin and Madison and Riley, because there were so many opportunities to use it. But yeah, we were very excited the yield was back. But I think because of that extra added layer, there was a reason why teams were always friendly with each other.
Yeah, so going into that third leg, how cool was the Amazon in general? Like, you're making food in that hut. I heard for a pit stop, you got to have like a giant like boat ride in the Amazon. So
The
how
Amazon, it was incredible. I mean, like that's on a bucket list item for me. Like I had gone to the Amazon in Ecuador, but like when I hear the Amazon, like I think of Brazil specifically. And to know that the Manaus is considered the heart of the Amazon, it was so exciting. And then knowing as a fan that Manaus, it's the first time they had ever been there. It was just a really, really cool leg. The market was pure chaos. And then being able to take that boat ride down the river to the indigenous tribe and get to work with them and like hear about their culture and like see how they make this meal. It was just, I thought, to me, one of the best episodes of our season. It was just really cool. And I'm glad that we got to experience it.
Yeah, so then going into that fourth leg, I gotta ask, how frustrating was the instrument roadblock?
The instrument roadblock was very frustrating. So I think also too, like what viewers didn't see is that from the airport to the orchestra, like there was actually another task we had to do that never aired. And it wasn't really a task. We just had to get to a clue box and rip open the clue. And that clue is what told us to go to the orchestra. When we got to that first clue box, we actually released our taxi. And we obviously had issues with finding another taxi. We get into a taxi, he didn't know where to go, so we actually lost a lot of time doing that. So when we showed up to the orchestra, I was actually like already flustered and in my head as it was, but to know we already had a lead over Michelle and Victoria and Haley and Kaylin, I was like, oh, at least there's teams behind us. The orchestra task itself, though, I know a lot of fans criticized that I got help. But I think there's a huge difference between getting tips and advice on how to properly assemble something than actually having someone physically do it for you. And I asked one or two questions, got the tips and advice that I needed. But even with that, I was still out of that task second. And people were so quick to criticize, well, James got help, but I clearly did it better and I did it quicker because I beat the teams that helped me. So I got a lot of hate for it, but in reality, like I think I did a pretty good job, especially for my first roadblock, because no one showed me how to do it. I still had to figure it out for myself, but it was definitely challenging.
Yeah, who cares about the hate? You got $1 million. It's all, you know what I mean? But after that, being super fans, what was it like doing the balancing bottle roadblock? Obviously, it was more complicated because you both had to do it compared to in season 20 where only one person had to do it.
Right. I mean, we were so stoked because that was one of the last episodes and seasons that we had watched before leaving. And I mean, you saw the clip of us practicing at home. We were a little tipsy on wine at home, just doing laundry while watching the episode and thought it would be fun to just try it out. So like never in a million years did we think that that would actually like play out on our season. And when it did, we were just like, what are the odds? Like, this is so crazy. But like you said, yeah, both of us had to do it. In season 20, it was the roadblock, only one person had to do it. So, especially with Will being a dancer, I felt really secure, but like I picked up on it a lot quicker than him because him being a dancer made it a lot more challenging. And he kind of talks about it a little bit during that task about how he's having to like retrain how to spot because now he's balancing a bottle on his head. So, it was really fun to do. I always love a good switchback. And we knew it was the better option of the two. Like, why would anyone do the watermelon stack? Why? I mean, it makes sense for the boys because I feel like they probably thought like brute strength, like we can probably crush this. But like, come on, there's too many variables where one watermelon slips and your whole tower crumbles. So I'm glad we picked the balancing of the bottles.
What was it like winning the leg? Like obviously like you're super fan. So what is that like maybe like winning your first leg and like obviously you go into the competition wanting to win, but you're like once you win that first leg, you're like, holy crap, I can actually win this competition. So what is that like?
Yeah, I mean, like when we were in the Amazon and we won Manaus, we already knew we were first place. So like the excitement kind of was like not really there because we already knew we were first place. Where the difference with Paraguay and being in Ascension is the two detours were in different parts of the city. So we had no idea how the teams were doing at the watermelon task. And it felt like we were at the balancing of the bottles for a very long time. So when we got to the pit stop and Phil told us we got first, it was like this, wait a minute, what? Like we got first place again, like back-to-back wins. Like it was further validation for us that we are fully capable of winning this if we can just keep being a solid unit, keep being great with our communication, all while enjoying the experience. I felt like we had full potential of making it to the final three.
Yeah, so after that leg, you go to Paris, and this seemed like at least, from my perspective, the most fun leg, except for driving stick. So, how frustrating was that dealing with Will's lack of stick driving? Like, what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, so going from Paraguay to Paris, like that was the longest flight that we pretty much had, with the exception of the finale. But going from Paraguay to Paris was like a 14-hour flight. And the moment we landed in Paris, it was like off and running. Where the legs before that, there was like a little bit of a hold, all the teams were together, and then we were all kind of released at the same time. So knowing that we had like this 30 to 40-minute lead over the second flight to Paris, we were feeling pretty good. But lo and behold, the infamous stick shift, like we we were confident, believe it or not, that we could do it, because before we left, we actually trained with a specific like stick shift driver's training class, like here in Los Angeles. But the issue was we trained on a very vintage European model from like the 60s or 70s. And we got the hang of that. Like it was no issue for us. But then when we were in Paris, it was a brand new like 2019 VW or whatever the car was, that it was almost so polar opposite from the stick shift that we had trained on that you could barely feel when you were switching gears. And I think that's what made it very challenging. And now being in a foreign country, it's our first time self-driving and not really knowing where we're at. It was very, very stressful. But I knew for Will, like I really kind of needed to be level-headed because he was getting so worked up and he was so emotional. And I know that was his biggest fear and mine too, going into this, that we would like be the reason for us being eliminated or like letting the other person down. So he was so upset and just kept apologizing to me. And I'm like, Will, like, we got this. Like, take a deep breath. Like, it'll all be fine. And then we felt like we were making progress, but then we get stuck on that freaking ramp. Of course, it's like 5 floors up to get to the main floor to get out of the parking garage. And that's when all hell broke loose, because now we're trapping Leo and Alana, we're trapping Michelle and Victoria. They're honking their horns, having no idea why we're stopped on this hill. So it was a very messy way to start the leg, especially knowing we had such a lead over flight number 2. And it just felt like we were losing that lead slowly. And it was just painful.
Did you enjoy getting thrown in the face by a pie, and did you try to grab one on the way out?
Yeah, we definitely enjoyed eating the frosting while we were whipping it up. Like, Will obviously is a big sweets guy, if you couldn't tell from the king cake in the finale, but we had so much fun with that, especially because we knew we had overcome the stick shift hurdle. We finally felt a lot better. I did that roadblock in 2 attempts. Like, I was in and out of there within 5 minutes. Like, it was such a quick roadblock, and we just felt like we were finally finding our stride. So being at the pie making and being there with Madison and Riley, as well as Michelle and Victoria and Leo, and like, we just felt like, okay, we're with the pack. Like, we're not losing time now. Obviously, going into the tent, we got the heads up from Madison and Riley that they were going to throw pies at us, but it honestly, I don't think would have made much of a difference, because like, you didn't have to hold the pie any certain way. Like, you could have like hugged the pie for all that it's worth. As long as you were able to present the pie at the very end, like, you did the task correctly. But it was so much fun. I've never been pied before, but when I tell you that frosting, when the whipped cream dried in your clothing, in your hair, it was the worst smell. It smelled like spoiled milk. Like, Will and I had to throw our shirts away after that leg because it was just dirty.
Can you kind of talk about that roadblock where you're propelling down the building, and um, was production mad at y'all for getting the answer?
Well, I also want to talk about something that happened on the train from Paris to Berlin. So obviously, like, in the edit while watching the show, the Mine Five was still being talked about, right? But Hung and Chi, Madison, Riley, and myself, like our teams, this was the first time collectively our 3 teams got together and said, we're riding this to the finish. And I kind of hinted back to like season 1. I was like, Frank and Margarita and Rob and Brennan and Team Guido, like in leg 2 or 3 of the first season, they came together because they were always at the front of the pack. and said, like, let's help each other, like, let's maintain our lead. And sure, there was a lot of inconsistency with the trust between those three teams throughout the season, but they still ended up making it to the top three. Same thing goes with season 21, like the Twinnies, Trey and Lexi, and the Chippendales. They had a really close knit relationship. They practically ran the race together. And if Natalie and Nadia didn't get kind of screwed over with their stick shift abilities, they probably would have all been the top three, but the goat farmers made it through. So Will and I knew, we always knew before we started the race, we wanted to form a strong pact with two other strong teams who were like-minded in their approach to the race. And we knew we could work really well with. And we always knew it was Madison and Riley and Hung and Chi for us. So being in Paris at the train station before we even left, we kind of broke away from the other teams and said, this is it. Like, this is the core three. We're going to be the top three together. And even Hung was having a lot of issues with Gary and D'Angelo at this point. And she's like, they keep taking, they never offer anything to this alliance. And I'm like, but it's not even an alliance. We just have to keep amusing them that it's an alliance, because the moment they don't feel like we're helping them, like, they might U-turn us, they might yield us. So like, we just need to keep playing it up like we are the Mine Five. So that was kind of like setting the tone going into Berlin. So when we got to that first roadblock of walking down the building, obviously, like, Will did the roadblock. I'm off to the side with Riley and Gary, and Chi, because they were all of our partners were doing the roadblock itself. And I don't remember who said it, but someone's like, work together, like, share the word or whatever it is. And Will essentially didn't even have to ask for the word. Like, before he even got to the bottom, they were like, the word sauerkraut, and he was just like, oh, okay, like sauerkraut. So like, it was just weird, like almost like game of telephone, where like, as you're walking down the wall, like, even if you didn't ask for help, you were going to get it, because Hung was so generous in sharing that information with our teams. But she really was conflicted on helping Gary and D'Angelo. And that had a lot to do with our conversation on the train going to Berlin. But she did it anyway. She helped them. It backfired. Gary and D'Angelo got the taxi before Hung and Chi. And of course, Gary and D'Angelo won that leg. I don't know necessarily. I mean, I didn't feel like there was tension in the fact that, our teams kind of worked together at that roadblock, if you will. But like, everyone's so fixated on like, oh, well, Hung, gave these words, but like, Aparna and Ishwar and Leo and Alana did the same exact thing. Like, to me, it's no different. They worked with each other to figure out the word sauerkraut. It's no different. So it was just really interesting how it was just that hard of a roadblock. I don't think any of us, it probably would have taken forever just to get the word, except for Hung, because Hung was a mastermind in figuring that out. But poor Haley and Kaylin, I think if the placements would have been different, like, I don't think that there would have been much help with the word sauerkraut, but I think because of how we were all at the top together, it just naturally, Hung being who she is and just being so generous, she shared the word.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The
I
Trabant,
was scared to death being in that.
I was worried, especially after coming off of the Paris leg and our issue with stick shift. And now we're having to learn a completely new version of stick shift, because the stick was like in the dashboard of the car, and it came with a manual, and we started it off just fine. Like, we were cruising a little while. Leo and Alana were following us. Like, we gained momentum. We ended up getting to, the disco, oh my gosh, what's it called?
That porta potty thing.
Yeah, the party and the porta potty kind of thing. Yeah, it was so much fun. And we were like, yeah, this is great. We're having so much fun. And then when we left there, that's obviously when it went all downhill and our car stalled. And we were given two options from production, and that was to either try to fix it ourselves, if we could figure out how to do it, or run. Usually in that case, like as we've seen in previous seasons, if there is a technicality like that, they have a backup vehicle for you. But when they were filming the shots of the cars before we even got there, one of the car lights was still on in the backup car. And so the battery was dead. So production couldn't adequately provide us with a new vehicle. So that's why we were given the two options we were. And we asked a local like where the hotel was in relation to where we were. And it was like a mile and a half. And so Will and I said, screw it. Like rather than waste time figuring out the vehicle, let's just run. Let's just book it. So we just started to run.
Well, and it paid off. So were you guys, after you do the roadblock, were you excited to do the chicken dance, or what was that like?
I love performing. I have a musical theater background, but when I learned we had to do it in German, I was a little worried because I didn't know what we were going to be judged on. And now like my future advice to teams and a little bit what we learned when we were doing the bottle dance is like practice what you're doing while being judged because like by the off chance you actually nail it, then maybe you'll get your next clue and you can proceed. So that was kind of the thought process Will and I had is we spent so much time preparing the song and learning it. Will's like, nobody's here. Like, let's just start doing it and see what we're being judged on. And then we can keep doing it over and over and over and hopefully nail it. So when we went in and we realized we had the cue cards in front of us, we were like, okay. So that we knew exactly what we were going to be judged on. We just had to make sure we knew the words and put on a performance. Like they wanted us to be big, they wanted us to be expressive, they wanted us to perform. So it was so much fun. I loved that detour, and I really wish we could have kept our costumes.
Yeah, so then after that, you finish the blonde bandits get saved again. So going to Kazakhstan, how cool was that knockout stunt detour? Because it looked like you were doing something from Game of Thrones or like Hunger Games-ish. That just
Yes.
cool.
It was so cool. I mean, especially because Will and I live in LA. We've been to different movie studios. We've been on movie sets before, but to actively like be thrown into a stunt scene like that, like I was living. I had such a great time and it was very choreographed. So like that was right up our alley as well. It was fun. It was just very, very cold in Kazakhstan, like very cold. But it was a great, like, I think Kazakhstan too was like probably the best episode of our season. I mean, obviously it was nominated for an Emmy, but I think that entire leg, just visually from the tasks to the setting we were in, it was just stunning. It was a really fun leg from start to finish.
So can you kind of talk about how you convinced the blonde bandits to use their yield on Leo and Alana? I think I heard somewhere, and I mean I interviewed them like 2 years ago, but talking to them, I think they were going to do it anyways. But why did you want them to use their yield? Because they didn't seem like that much of a threat.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of different layers to that question. Obviously, Will and I knew that there was one team in the race. First off, we knew that there were still yields in the race. We also knew that there was going to be at least one other U turn. And the only team in the race for us that we felt like would use it was Leo and Alana. We felt like Leo and Alana had the potential to yield us or U turn us if they were ever ahead of us. And that was kind of threatening to our race. So when we were at the yurt building, we're building the yurt, we're doing our thing. And when we saw Haley and Kaylin show up to it before Leo and Alana, we felt like it was the perfect opportunity to maybe get a yield played. As fans of the race, we want that excitement. We wanted a yield to be used. No yield had been used up until that point. So selfishly, too, as a fan, I just wanted a yield to be played. But then on the strategy side, knowing going into the next leg that if Haley and Kaylin survived, they wouldn't have a yield. So it makes them more of like if we yield Haley and Kaylin, they can't retaliate kind of mentality. So when we saw Haley and Kaylin show up, we figured let's try to encourage them. Everyone kept thinking we were pressuring them, but no, we wanted to encourage them to use it because we loved everyone on the race. Our cast was amazing. But Haley and Kaylin, like, what's not to love about those two? They are just so freaking charming. They are the nicest girls in the world. And we wanted to just see like if we could help them in any regard. So we said, you guys should use your yield. We kind of told them obviously that the task was taking, it was a little time consuming. It had to do with building and using your hands. And they were very appreciative of that intel. But yeah, like they are completely grown, capable women who can make a decision for themselves. And they knew for their race that that was the best move for them. And so I applaud them. Sure, did Will and I maybe have some influence? Yes. But at the end of the day, Haley and Kaylin played their yield. And it was a smart move that paid off for them. But it just, it also made for some fun little drama.
Yeah, it did. So, were you excited for the mega leg? Were you nervous about it? What was your mindset?
Well, knowing that the mega leg was going to take place in India, I think was what was freaking me out a little bit because I felt like from previous seasons, any legs that took place in India, they were always like the hardest legs. There's so much to learn and navigate and pick up on. And so I was like, oh my gosh, it's going to be a long freaking day in India. And it was so hot out and oh my goodness. It was just a long day. I was excited because the Mega Leg is new. It's intriguing. It's something different. And to be able to say we did it was exciting, but it definitely was nerve wracking going into India, being like, we're going to have a long day of double the roadblocks, double the detours, double the action. But yeah.
I was dealing with the coding when you're going into India, and then also, what is it like navigating through that? Because like every time where I've spoken to people in India, they're like, the navigation was horrible. It was miserable. I felt like, I mean, most of these teams were eliminated, and the one that wasn't got her head shaved. So,
Yeah.
what was that like? Maybe like navigating through it because it seemed like the most congested as far as like traffic and like just like the way that they're driving just like scared the crap out of me. So maybe talk about like the coding and then just like dealing with all the emotions of like getting from place to place.
Yeah, I think that's a better way of articulating why I was so nervous about the mega leg is because I knew just the navigation and just trying to figure out how to get from point A to point B was going to be the most challenging part about a leg in India, just from the previous seasons and legs that I've seen. So the navigation was definitely challenging, especially because we were never in control. Like we had taxi drivers. And so you're kind of at their control. And that was Will's biggest fear going into the race was having a bad taxi driver because like there's not much you can do other than be like, pull over, let's get a new one. So even leaving from the airport to the smog check with the rickshaws, we got there like second, and then Haley and Kaylin got there before Hung and Chi and Madison and Riley. So we're like, wow, this leg can go one of many different ways if we're already starting off like this. Because Ishwar and Aparna got there first. So like all the placements started to shake up and shift a lot from previous legs. So navigation was stressful because everyone just kind of drives and kind of flows with traffic and weaving in and out of each other. And it was just very, very different. The binary code stuff was so much fun. Like Will and I are gamers. We love escape rooms. We love video games. We love anything technology based. So we had the best time with that. And we got in and out very quickly. We were the first team to finish that side of the detour. And then, of course, going from there to the tomb and it being the roadblock, we were the first team to show up. It was just kind of a weird realization of like, wow, we're like leading the pack. We had about like a 20-minute lead over all the other teams at that point. So I was like, oh my gosh, like we're gonna crush this mega leg, smooth sailing, like we've got this. But when we got to the roadblock and it was the yield, there was a lot of thought process that went into play about playing that yield. So what people didn't see is we had a layover in Dubai on the way to Hyderabad, and we had lunch with Ishwar and Aparna. And while we were eating Shake Shack with them, I asked, there's got to be another U-turn coming up, obviously 2 yields on this leg. What do you guys think you would do if you got to the U-turn board or the yield first? And Ishwar answered and said, probably Hung and Chi, like they've been the most consistent throughout this race. But then again, like you two are really strong and like are working really well together. And I was like, damn, like that's bold. Like you're telling us to our face that you might yield or U-turn us. Like that was a little nerve-wracking. So we immediately went and found Hung and Chi and Madison and Riley, and we sat down and we said, what do we do? Like, what's our game plan? Like, we need to have an idea of what we're going to do with the yields just to make sure we play them correctly. If there's a U-turn or double the U-turn on this leg, like, how do we want to play it? And obviously, like, there was a lot of tension with Gary and D'Angelo at this point. So we were under the impression that we were going to yield Gary and D'Angelo. Like, that was the plan. But when we got to the rickshaw task in India and saw that Haley and Kaylin showed up first before, you know, Hung and Chi and Madison and Riley, we're like, oh shit, like this is kind of like a Haley and Kaylin could completely do really well here. So when we got to the binary code and we left first, we had no idea where Haley and Kaylin were. And so we were like, okay, maybe if we yield them, it gives Hung and Chi and Madison and Riley a little bit of a buffer to catch up. Whereas like Gary and D'Angelo, they're right behind us. The chances of our yield really putting a dent in their race is very, very slim. All they're going to do is cost them 20 minutes, and then they're going to be pissed off at us, and they could retaliate with their yield, or they could potentially U-turn us. So we made the judgment call to yield Haley and Kaylin, but we never could have anticipated when we yielded them that they were that far behind. They got really caught up doing the other side of the detour, had really terrible streak of bad luck. Never in a million years did we think that they were going to fall that far behind. So yeah, that was our thought process doing the yield. We didn't want to yield Haley and Kaylin, but we felt like to be the most safe without retaliation, it was the right thing to do.
That makes sense because the way that it was portrayed was that you kind of were like protecting your alliance, but I was like, they're not a threat and they're smart enough to realize like who cares about the alliance right now? There's 6 teams left. So that makes sense. Anyway, so much with like that turban matching roadblock.
Yeah. There's a lot of factors. Honestly, that was my least favorite roadblock of the entire experience. I think there was a little bit of a design flaw. When I first got there, I was told that I had to search the entire tomb, and the tomb was pretty big. So it was a lot of ground to cover, and the iPad, for whatever reason, like I just couldn't find the AI that I was supposed to be looking for. And I'm running on this whole tomb. Finally, one of the men popped up on my screen, and I was like, got it. Like, I got the turban down, the design's down, and they said I had to match it with the placement above. So underneath the tomb, there was multiple pillars. And the pillar that I saw the AI on, I was like, okay, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, it's 6 down. Got it. So when I ran upstairs on the main floor of the tomb, there were squares positioned. And so I counted 6 over from the farthest to my left to know, okay, 6 over, boom, got it. This is the placement. This is where I saw the guy with the turban. This is it. So when I didn't get it, I was really confused because I was like, 6 squares over, that's 6 columns or 6 pillars underneath here. That makes the most sense to me. It never worked. I was like, what am I doing wrong? Okay, I would count. Okay, this one's 4 over. I would go up, place the turban guy on there, and I'd be like, okay, the turban's correctly. This is square number 4. Got it. Check. Wrong. I'm like, what am I? I was getting so frustrated, especially because Hung and Chi got there so quickly. Gary and D'Angelo got there so quickly, and Gary was picking up on it. Like he was like he designed the challenge himself. He had no issues. And Ishwar started to struggle just as much as I was. So Ishwar and I were talking. I'm like, what are we doing wrong? Like, this doesn't make sense. He's like, I don't get it. Like, I'm counting 6 over, 6 here. Go up there, 6 over. That is there. That's how it should have been, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But Gary was like, don't count the pillars, turn around and look out into the field and align where your vision is with what's in the field. So when you go up there, you'll place it because the squares weren't necessarily in alignment with the pillars underneath. I was like, okay. So I found a guy again. I looked behind me and I saw a tree. I was like, great, that's my marker, the tree out in the field. So I went upstairs, found the square, and it was like 2 squares off from the pillar I found. Turn around and go, there's the tree, check. And it was right. It just didn't really make sense to me. The iPads were so faulty. I was told I could explore the entire tomb. And then as other teams started to show up, I was told it was only the front half of the tomb. It was just a lot of miscommunication, a little lack of clarity, but you know what? I did it.
That's why they don't do the mega leg anymore, because it's a big like hassle for production to deal with all of that. I mean,
A lot of moving parts. There's a lot of moving parts. Yeah.
why did you go in and choose gardening? Because that is tough, bending over, planning all that stuff, being organized, and obviously the fishnet. What do you call it? Obviously the fishnet took shorter for other teams.
Yeah, definitely. Well, just to kind of close out the India leg, I like India was incredible. Like we had so much fun. The palace was stunning. It was a really great way to end the leg. So going into Cambodia, obviously, obviously that roadblock where like we're trying to not help Gary and D'Angelo and poor Haley and Kaylin. I don't think any of us anticipated them being so far behind. It had nothing to do with our yields. I know people like to think that it did, but it had nothing to do with the yields. The yields added more time to them being that far behind, which was really, really unfortunate. So when we were like the mine 5 or the top 5, and honestly, like, I don't think in theory, this mine 5 narrative or edit would have been so prominent if our 5 teams weren't the 5 teams. You know what I mean? Like, let's say if Haley and Kaylin made it to the top 5, mine 5 probably never would have been talked about. It would have just been the core 3 of Madison, Riley, Hung Chi, and I. So obviously at the 5, we were like, okay, great. Like, no more mine 5. We can finally stop talking about this. And we're talking with Hung and Chi, we're talking with Madison and Riley. We had a plan. Like we knew there was a U-turn on this leg. We said it in one of the clues. We knew this was the last time to use it. And we decided, okay, if we're at the U-turn board, we are going to U-turn Gary and D'Angelo and we're burning it. Like 100% that's the plan. But then when we're talking with Gary and D'Angelo, the plan in their mind is we're going to U-turn Ishwar and Aparna and we're going to burn the board. Never thinking Gary and D'Angelo would get to the U-turn first. We're like, come on, 3 out of the 5 teams are in on this plan for Gary and D'Angelo. We got this. So when we get to the boating thing, we get to the temple, we give our donations over, and it was the detour clue. We really didn't know what the detour really entailed. It sounded like a lot of heavy lifting as well as catching fish. And again, with our philosophy on the race, you don't do a detour or a challenge with an animal because you don't know how that'll go. We would rather be in control of our own fate, and that's gardening. So we did the gardening detour, never really realizing how much easier the fish side of the detour was, how faster the detour with the fishing was, until we got to the U-turn board and we were like, oh shit, like we're in last place. Like we're the last team to get there. Like even Ishwar and Aparna had already gotten to the board and they were already on their way to the gardening detour by the time we got to the U-turn. So we were like, gosh, darn it. We were so frustrated because we had this plan in mind. The U-turn didn't go as planned, but also in reality it did because Gary and D'Angelo didn't U-turn us. Like as long as we weren't U-turned, we didn't really care. So it was just kind of a mess. Wish we would have done the fish detour in hindsight, because then maybe our plan would have worked.
Yeah, so obviously this didn't happen, but being strategic as you guys were, if you had got into the board second, would you have maybe wanted to take a shot at Riley and Madison and Hung and Chi, even though you did have a final 3 pack? Because they did seem kind of the biggest competition.
I can say that Will and I would not have. However, it entirely depends on the circumstance, right? Like let's say we get there and we knew we were, neck and neck with like Hung and Chi after the gardening. Let's use that as an example. If we knew we got there and we were like neck and neck for last with Hung and Chi, maybe we would have reconsidered. It's entirely circumstantial. But given how it played out, if we were one of the first teams there, I don't think we would have U-turned Hung and Chi, and I don't think we would have taken a shot at either of them. It just for us didn't really make sense unless we absolutely had to.
Yeah, that makes sense. So obviously you do well in Cambodia, you go to the Philippines. So what is that like as Amazing Race fans? Like you see Phil before the pit stop. That is not his job. You are not supposed to see him. I mean, before the pit stop. So what is that like, and what are you thinking before he even announces it, or what are you thinking is going to happen?
There's actually a bonus clip on YouTube from our season that we kind of already knew, obviously, that we were going to go meet Phil at Lapu Lapu Circle, and we boarded a jeepney, all four of our teams, and it's so funny because like all the guys in the final are big dudes. And then there's me, Chi, and Hung. And Will, D'Angelo, Gary, Madison, and Riley, they're all like hunched over in this. It's just a really funny clip. I encourage people to go watch it if they want to know what I'm talking about. But yeah, like getting in that jeepney, we were all kind of confused, like what's going on? Like, is this leg going to be different? We were all kind of like coming up with really fun theories about like what this could mean. We were like, maybe for the first time ever, it'd be like a family visit, and like we're gonna go to the starting line of this pit, the pit start for this leg, and like our families are gonna be there, and like they're gonna have to watch us do a task, or maybe they have to run this leg. Like we were all coming up with the craziest theories as to what this could be. Obviously, never guessing that it would be a city sprint. First time ever on Amazing Race. I kind of enjoyed the city sprint. It made it different. It changed things up a little bit. When I tell you we were constantly moving that leg, we were constantly moving that leg. It was so exhausting. The humidity in the Philippines was so high that day. Like it was a lot.
Yeah. So how awful was that high heel run?
I loved it. Excuse me. I could sprint in heels all day. It was funny to watch Will in heels because he's like size 12, size 13. The shoes in the Philippines are not that large. They can't accommodate Will. So he's like trying to like squeeze his feet into these heels. It was just really funny. D'Angelo and Gary had the same issue. Madison and Riley had the same issue. It was kind of funny though, because we just kept thinking like, what does this have to do with anything? Like at the time we didn't understand it. Obviously we watched the episode and like heard about the high heel races and like that area of the Philippines being like a shoe manufacturer. Like it just made sense. But like in the meantime, we're like, this is so random.
So then after the high heel run, I gotta ask, how stressful was you gotta pair a flag to a song? I mean, it looked easier watching on TV, but obviously we saw that it was really difficult. And then you have to complete it, or otherwise you're going home. So how stressful was that? When did the strategy of like ganging up on them really happen? Like, was that just a spur of the moment thing, or were you planning to do that all along? Because y'all wanted Gary and D'Angelo for a while, it seemed like. So can you kind of take me through that entire moment?
Yeah, I think contrary to popular belief, Phil said at the beginning of this leg, like, don't help each other. Like this is like the penultimate leg. Like only three of you can make it to the finish line. All of the teams took that to heart. Like none of us wanted to help each other. We knew how serious this was. We wanted to make sure we could do what we needed to get to the top three spots. So it never crossed our minds the whole leg that we would help each other. During that task, I would say probably 30, 45 minutes to an hour into it. Like it took a while. When all four teams were there, all of us were struggling. When we first got there. Madison and Riley, like, let's work together. Will immediately shut them down and said no. Gary and D'Angelo said the same thing. Why are we helping each other? Like, this would be so easy. We all just said no. So after being there for a while and like writing out the different, combinations of the flags, nothing was sticking. Like, nothing was making sense, to the point where we were all just kind of at a standstill. We were like, what do we do? Why are we not getting this? So that's when we said, you know what? We should work together. This is an opportunity to like solidify that our three teams get to the top three, which is what we all wanted to have happen. So let's work together. So that's when Gary and D'Angelo could see us starting to work together. But I'm telling you, if that challenge wasn't so difficult, I don't think any of us would have helped each other. It just got to the point where we had no other option. No other option. We had to work together. Because the issue with this challenge, and again, I still think it's a little bit of a design flaw. Obviously, like, we had to put the flags in order of how we heard the music on The Amazing Race, not the order of how they were being played by the band. We picked up on that. That was not the issue. It was the flag of Paris. None of the teams in the top four heard music in Paris. That was the first country we all ruled out as an option. I'm not even kidding you. We knew immediately, okay, Colombia with the tightrope, Trinidad and Tobago with the steel drums. We knew those. Paris did not make sense to us. So when we were doing all the different combinations, Riley had written out all the different options of what we could do for that spot. So we kept filtering out that flag. And when they said it's Paris, we were like, this doesn't make sense to us because we didn't hear music in Paris. Hi, Zoe. That it just kind of was confusing for us, because when we did the roadblock in Paris, there was a band. But I know for a fact when I was there, the band was not playing. I was there that quick. I was in and out in that roadblock. Same thing with Gary. He's like, I did not hear music in Paris at all. Hung and she were confused. Madison and Riley were like, when was there a band? So like, none of us knew Paris was the answer. It just was like process of elimination. That was the hardest part. It was the Paris is what held us up.
What is that feeling like? You get to the mat with like your three alliance members and you realize, oh my God, I actually made the final three.
It was a very bittersweet, exciting, out of body moment, because I feel like we obviously accomplished something that most teams on Amazing Race haven't been able to. And that was all of us working together with a common goal of being in the top three. So to know that we did that, and it was a long-term pact that we stuck to from very early on in the race, like, I think it was just a moment of being proud. We were just very proud that we did it. Also, just to be able to be on the mat together with our three teams and be interviewed by Phil about how we were feeling. And it was just a very emotional moment. We were all crying. We were all hugging. Like, that is a moment I'll never forget from my Amazing Race experience. But hearing Phil say, like, we will be one of the three teams racing to the finish line was like, I've only ever dreamed of hearing that. Outside of hearing him say the world is waiting and being told that we're the winners of Amazing Race, like, that was a highlight. To be told we did it, we will be crossing the finish line. It was like a sense of completion, and that was very exciting.
Yeah, so then after that, you go into the final three and you were going to New Orleans. Were you excited about that? Because Will obviously said that he's been to New Orleans a couple of times. It seemed like you guys knew where you were going. So what were your thoughts on going there for the finale?
Yeah, I mean, I had never been to New Orleans, so I was very excited when we heard it was going to be a night leg. Even more exciting because New Orleans has such a very lively nightlife. So we were like, oh, we could only imagine what we would be getting ourselves into. Will was looking forward to it just because it is a very special memory for him with his grandma. It was just a long trip to get to New Orleans. We had like a 12 and a half flight from Manila to Los Angeles. And we were in LAX for a couple of hours waiting for our flight to New Orleans. And then from LAX to New Orleans, it was like another 3 hour flight. So it was almost like a 24-hour day of travel. And then we had to sit in the New Orleans airport for like another hour or two before we could even start the final leg because I think they were still doing some setup. But yeah, it was just a long day to even get to New Orleans.
Yeah, so your first task, you have to get beads for Mardi Gras. How exciting and how stressful is that? Because you have to get a certain type of bead, and then you have to count, and one wrong number could screw your entire race up. So what were you like with that? I mean, it seems simple enough, but it could have been a death notice.
Yeah, it was very chaotic. Not only are you getting beads thrown at you from the balcony in the French Quarter, if beads, flew into the crowd of the bystanders around us, cheering us on, like they would start throwing beads at you. So you're constantly being hit with beads from left and right, up and down. And then to also, like you mentioned, be very mindful of what beads you're grabbing and making sure that it was the beads that the grand marshal was wearing. Like you just wanted to really just take a beat to like process your surroundings. But we also knew, you know what, this is the end of our journey. It's going to be over before we know it. Like, let's just have fun, especially in a place like Mardi Gras. So, like, we're dancing, we're like, waving to the crowd. They're throwing more beads at us. And I'm so glad I reread the clue just to be safe of it being like that you had to be very specific about the beads. So luckily we were already kind of on the right track with that, but we did it very, very quickly. We just wanted to do what we could to make sure we could maintain our lead.
Yeah, so then after that, you go and you have a huge lead because or yeah, Will completely crushes it with the king cake, gets the baby, you demolish those beignets. Now you have to face your worst fear going over a bridge and like having to zip line and get a clue. So what is that like? Because at this point, I'm not sure if you knew you had a big lead, but like you have to conquer a fear for $1 million. And as much as you say it's for $1 million, fear can take over. So what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, I thought I had dodged a bullet all season long about doing any task that was heights related. I was like, yes, I'm going to make it through this whole season not having to do anything with heights. I was not expecting nor anticipating that because, another factor of why Will did the king cake is because we assumed the next roadblock might be a memory task. And I was like, I'm ready to crush. Like, if I have to do a memory task that's based on all the legs we just did, like, I'm the person for that. But when I ripped open the clue, it was like, I have to jump off this bridge and like grab the clue. I was not thrilled. I was definitely scared. I was a little emotional. It was very high up, and the wind also didn't help. It was rather windy. Being told it's 180 feet above the Mississippi River also didn't help. I probably shouldn't have asked that question. But I think it was like, what I never thought I would do it because like I watched the show and I'm like, all these people jumping off this building or jumping off this cliff. Like I was like, I could never do that. Like I just feel like my body would freeze. It was almost like a fight or flight sensation. And I was ready to just get in, do it, get it done with, because I knew if I jumped, I feel like that would solidify the lead that Will and I had. And I didn't want to be the reason why we lost our lead. So the moment he counted me down and said jump, I was like, I don't know what came over me, but I was like, didn't even think twice. I just did it. It was a little painful, but it was fun.
So what is that like actually doing it and completing it and realize, okay, I'm good. I can take like a deep breath. I'm done. And then like, were you like, did you conquer your fear? Like, what was it like just actually doing it?
I do like to think that I conquered my fear a little bit. Like I think I would do something like that again. Because it wasn't like a bungee jump, right? Like it was a swing. Like it was just like very like a high off the ground swing. The bungee jump side of it would freak me out if I ever had to do bungee jumping. But I think in a way I conquered my fear. But then I got done with it. I thought I was good. Thought I was in the clear. And then Will was like, we have to rappel down the bridge now. I was like, again, like now we have to go down the bridge. It was like, no, more heights. But that was easier because I had Will. We got to talk to each other the whole way down, and just kept maintaining our lead.
Yeah, so after that, you go in your taxi driver's killing it. You go to that final thing where you have to build like a float puzzle almost with the map. Were you kind of excited about that or nervous? Because we haven't really seen that. Like normally you see like a memory thing where you have to like drag like huge items and match them with like flags and stuff. But what were your thoughts on that?
I was so excited for it because geography is my jam. Like I aced it in college. We prepared like by looking at maps and looking at flags. So we knew exactly how to build it. Assembling it wasn't the issue. Obviously, there'd be like a few strips here and there with like just like the subtle bits of green, and you're like, which continent does this attach to? But it was so much fun, especially because we had to really work together. Like he would have to like stabilize the ball while I stuck it onto the Velcro, and then we would have to roll it and stabilize the ball. Like it was just a really fun thing for him and I to do together. And I think what made it even better was like knowing the lead that we had, it allowed us to have fun with it.
Yeah, so after that, you complete that. There's not too many dramatics because, I mean, you were so far ahead at that point, we really couldn't see it. So, can you kind of talk about like what is it like getting in that taxi, realizing, oh my God, like we're gonna win the amazing race, and then crossing that finish line, and then it being like officially like, oh my God, we just won $1 million.
Yeah, it was one of those moments where we really just kind of wanted to savor it. Like we knew, like after ripping open that clue, that this was it. Like this is the end of the amazing race, and we're on our way to the finish line. So we really just kind of wanted to like sit in that moment, feel our emotions, process our emotions, be so proud of the race that we ran. It was a feeling that I don't think I'll ever feel again. Like I can't even begin to explain the emotions we felt in the taxi from Mardi Gras World to the Superdome. And then even getting out and just, before we ran into the stadium, like we had a moment where we just took a deep breath and I was like, soak it in, like live it up. Like this is it. Like we did it. And then running into the stadium, it was super bright, all the lights, the band is playing, all the teams are cheering us on. And then seeing Phil, like it was just, I just being able to have that experience, I am eternally grateful for it. It was just so incredible.
So, what was the proposal like? How was that? Obviously, you're getting married, so it's like the best moment of your life. But what was that like? And did you have like a fun party afterwards? Because all of you like were in New Orleans. Spill
Uh, yeah, so obviously the proposal happened, very out of body experience, had no idea that that was even coming. It was, it was just a big gesture on Will's part to do that and to say what he's like. It was just very special. Like, and I loved it'll just something that moment will be ingrained in my brain for the rest of my life, obviously. Sadly, we didn't have a party. We had to wait at the pits at the finish line for Hung and Chi and Madison and Riley. So we hung out with all the other teams. They all congratulated us. They all told us how happy they were for us. And it was just really fun to like finally breathe and not be stressed and not have anxiety and to be able to just sit down with the other teams again and catch up with them and hear about what their experience was like. And it just, I don't know, it was just really nice to have that downtime. And then by the time Hung and Chi and Madison and Riley got there, we had to go straight to interviews with producers. And after the interviews, we got shuttled to the hotel. And by the time we got to the hotel for the wrap party, it was already like 1 in the morning. And like everything was closing down because a lot of us had to catch flights at like 6 a.m. to go home. So like we didn't really get much closure. It was very rushed, which was unfortunate, but I just, yeah, it was such a blur. We were so tired.
Yeah, so my last question, or my last two questions is, do you have any like fun behind the scenes stories that you want to share or anything?
I mean, we just had a really incredible cast. Like, I'm so grateful for the experience we had because a lot of Amazing Race casts, when you talk to them, don't have close relationships or bonds with the other teams. And I don't know what it was or what the formula was with casting our season. We were all just so competitive, recognized that it was just a race. We all knew at the end of the day, only one team could win. We all knew that nothing was personal, it was strictly business. Like everyone was there to compete. But when we weren't racing and we were in the airports just hanging out or, at the breakfast buffet in the morning at the hotels, like it was just so nice to have those moments with each other. I think the biggest highlight for me still is we got to celebrate Thanksgiving in Berlin. So at the end of the Berlin leg, we had to stay in these camper van hostel, and everyone kind of had their own little camper van to themselves. But we got to have a Thanksgiving feast, and no cameras were rolling. It was just the teams. It was just us sitting in this little common area of the hostel, and we just talked and opened up about life and what our futures looked like after the race and what we wanted to get out of the experience. And like Leo and Alana opened up about their relationship and marriage, and like here they are married with their first child, and just having those conversations on Thanksgiving. And here we are 5 years later, and a lot of what we talked about has come to fruition for a lot of these teams. I think is very special. And to have been a part of these special moments and milestones with each other over the last 5 years makes it even more of a well-rounded experience. So it was just those moments off camera when we weren't racing, just really bonding. Like the salt mine, God, we had so much fun. All of us would stay up late talking. We would do bathroom trips together, and it just those were the biggest highlights for me. It was just the non-race moments with teams that if it wasn't for the Amazing Race, we never would have met. And they now have had such a profound impact on our life, on our relationship, on our marriage. And I just am so grateful for the cast that we got to race with.
Yeah, so after, or my last question is, if you had to go on all winners, which I assume there will be an all winners eventually, who would you want to compete against?
Oh, I mean, my gut knee jerk reaction is Robin Brennan. Like to race against the OGs, it would be like playing Survivor with Richard Hatch, like the team that like paved the way for Amazing Race to be on for so many seasons and years. Like to race with Robin Brennan would be iconic, especially because I will never forget watching them finish the Amazing Race, cross the finish line, and think to myself, I want to do this one day. So that would be really cool. I would also love to race with Chip and Kim. They are such a fun team. I loved their relationship. They were so fun to watch on their season. Same with Uchenna and Joyce. Who else would I love to race with? I mean, I'm best friends with Laura Pearson from season 26. So it'd be kind of a fun, friendly, competitive race with Laura. Derek and Claire, obviously, because we're friends with them. So it'd be really fun to race with Derek and Claire. God, there's so many good teams that it would be really fun to see a like victory lap season of the Amazing Race. Who knows what the future holds, but it would be fun to do. And we would literally do Amazing Race time and time again if we ever had the opportunity to do it. Just so glad we were able to chat. Like I said, I've enjoyed watching your interviews.